How did the Planet 12 concept start? Well, it's broken down into two sections. For one, it started off as my personal musical development, and it later turned into a musical rebellious development in a lot of different ways because of what I was going through in my preteen and my early teen years. Everybody knows the music part already, so I'm going to break down the social part to you first. Um, as most of my fans may know, I'm a huge cartoon, comic book, science fiction fanatic, and those three worlds, they appear to be very different to some people, but for some of us who just love pure entertainment, um, it becomes a lot to some of us who really, really dug deep. Most of my fans know I love to laugh. I'm a jokester at heart, as serious as I can be and militant as I can be. I love to crack jokes. I love to have fun. So the humor side was always the beginning of what Planet 12 was about because the whole point was to give good entertainment at the same time, make you laugh and make you have fun or to make you think about something. So Bugs Bunny, those kind of cartoons, Scooby Doo, I grew up with all that stuff like most of my peers did. So, that's the humor side of what I do lyrically. Because if everybody knows when I write a rap, I tend to throw in a funny punchline in there every now and then. That's usually because that comes from all the years I spent watching cartoons. I still do to this day. I still having fun watching and enjoying cartoons. Then there's the comic book structure. I mean, because every young boy, whether you're from the hood or the burbs, always wanted to be their favorite superhero. And of course, for us real die-hard comic book heads, it was all about Marvel and DC Comics. And, my number one favorite being Batman. The stories of the Fantastic Four and X-Men and Iron Man, the Avengers, all that stuff fascinated me as a child. And then the probably number three and the most important, science fiction. Because in high school and even in junior high school and even going back to elementary, science and English were my two favorite subjects in school. So I paid attention the most in those two classes more than anything else besides gym, of course. So I combined all three of those worlds together when I started to come up with this concept. It's pretty much the funny part of it, the action part of it, and then the deep part of it. So if you notice, all three things work together. The cartoons was the funny side of me. The comic book was the adventurous, rebellious side of me and wanting to conquer the world. And the science fiction side was for me to put something deep to make people understand where I was really coming from. So it was like trying to be on some next shit at the same time. Then came the musical part of it all. The musical part is between the ages of 8 and 12. I was really rapidly developing as a musician, as a singer, because to me it became more than just imitating Michael Jackson's dance moves and dressing like Prince and doing all these different things that I was doing in the talent shows that I was a part of, and all the dance competitions and singing, and my uncle Bobby had a lot to do with that because he really trained me and prepped me for the stage. So I was really advancing because when he and my mother wasn't around, I was at home reading the liner notes and the album credits to all these great albums that I had. And, I already had the blues and gospel and R&B soul thing down pat. But then two very important things happened to me musically. At the age of 7, I discovered hip hop and rap music. And that was partially due to two very important people. My cousin Showbiz, who was already hanging out with Kumo D and Melody Mel in the Bronx during the time when hip hop started to make its rounds, and another group out of Hollis, Queens called Run DMC. When I discovered these dudes, I automatically knew that had to be a part of what I was doing because I saw Rockbox and I just thought that these guys were real cool, especially Run. Run is definitely the first lyricist that I really looked up to. I was like, oh, that's dope. My favorite line of this day was he says, Calvin Klein, no friend of mine, don't want nobody's name on my behind. I was just like, oh, shoot, that was just a dope punchline and metaphor to begin with. So I started getting more into hip hop, and hip hop gave me more of a voice for the normal side of me because I was into comic books and science fiction. Some of the kids on my block and some of the people that knew me, they'd be like, "Oh, Lord's off the hook. He's weird. He's eccentric." That's because I was really, really deep into this comic book science stuff. So hip hop gave me a chance to show everybody that I was normal and that I was hip to everything because I'm a Brooklyn hood boy. So I was definitely into what was going on. And because I had started breakdancing already, I was definitely hip to the whole science of the four arts of hip hop, which is breaking, graffiti, DJing, and rhyming. So I had that all down pat by the time I was 9 because I really immersed myself in the culture. And the last important element musically for me was the funk, which I already had a grasp on because of the fact that, James Brown was my number one influence at that time in terms of the dancing and how to work a stage and different things like that. So in talent shows, I would throw the microphone back, splits, and do all that crazy stuff that James is known for doing. And, but then around 11 and 12, I started really, really listening to the musical aspect of what James was doing as opposed to the performing aspect. So I started understanding why Bootsy Collins and Catfish and Fred Thomas and Maceo Parker, I started understanding the musicianship. And it made me dig deeper because, as everybody should know, James Brown is the creator of the funk. And my uncle Tony T. Funk Austin, who actually played drums for James Brown in the early 80s, as well as African Bambaataa on his classic song, Jazz Sensation. Yes, that's my uncle playing drums. He used to have these crates of records that he would bring to my house all the time. And whenever I would stay home from school or on the weekends, I would always go through his collection. That's how I discovered groups like the Commodores, Kool and the Gang, the Ozzy Brothers, Mandrill. I started discovering all these different funk groups, Sky, Brass Construction, and Crown Heights Affair, who's actually like family to me. I started discovering all these different albums and just listening to the arrangements, the musicianship, and funk became my calling card. Funk spoke to me more than any other musical genre, and that was pretty much the combination of all these different things. Now, with all this going on, by the time I turned 12, I was faced with a dilemma. Why? Because, I'm doing all this stuff. I'm rapping, I'm singing, I'm dancing, I'm learning how to produce, and I was torn between both worlds because, on the younger side of things, hip hop was the sound of the young generation at that time, which I was a part of. And I love to rap, I love to break dance, I love to, come up with different types of rhyme schemes. But then there's the other side of me that grew up with the foundation of gospel, blues, and R&B and jazz and things of that nature. And I didn't want to let that go either. And I felt like I was like a tug of war because the older generation of my family is like, oh, that's noise. Rap is a whole bunch of noise. You know how that is. And on the other side, the young generation is like, yeah, keep that rapping stuff for, man. I know you can sing, but we ain't really trying to hear all that. I've been blessed enough that I didn't really have that problem growing up. I wasn't made fun of when I sung or danced, anything like that. I always had support from my hood, which is rare because usually when you're doing things like that, people are going to try to point fingers or make fun of you. I never really went through that, so that was kind of like a blessing in disguise in a lot of different ways. But the whole thing was that I made a decision that I wanted to do all of these things. I didn't want to just be one thing, especially because I started getting a lot more into Prince. Michael Jackson was my original number one hero, but then I started getting into what Prince was doing because, see, Prince, with every album, he would change it up, whether it was the image or the musical part. Like, he did all kinds of music. And same thing with Stevie Wonder. And that's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to do all kinds of music and not be labeled just one thing. So now comes the idea of how do I package this thing? How can I make people see? Because I couldn't just come out and be regular. I didn't want to dress like Prince and I didn't want to dress like Michael Jackson. Like, how do I have my own style? Like, how do I make all this mesh together? And that's when I came across the album that would ultimately change my life forever. And that was the Parliament's Mothership Connection album. I found it in my Uncle Tony's collection where you pull it up, and as everybody knows, if you're a P-Funk fan, there's George, a very young George Clinton, sitting on a UFO flying through space. And that's when I realized right then and there that, wow, this is exactly what I'm talking about. And then on the back of that classic album cover, the UFO with George has landed in the back alley of the ghetto somewhere. It looked just like one of the neighborhoods in Brooklyn. I think that picture was taken in Detroit, if I'm not mistaken. But I got the concept because then as I got deeper into P-Funk and did more reading and did more knowledge and research, I realized that George was speaking the language of the streets and the 70s slang using the space imagery. The space imagery was used to get your attention so he can tell you what he was thinking about and what his whole plan was musically. If you listen to the intro to Mothership Connection, he says it. Star Child here, citizens of the universe, recording angels, we have returned to claim the pyramids, partying on the mothership. And I was just really intrigued by that. For that whole year, that's the only album I listened to. And I began to think like George, walk like George, act like George, and want to be George, and pray to God one day that I get to meet my idol and work with him, or even be in the P-Funk camp. Well, as everybody knows, all three of those dreams came true. But back to the story. I started getting into that album, and that's when it hit me. Planet 12. Now, again, the synonymous numeral of 12. I was 12 years old at that time. That's number one. 12 is my favorite number. And on top of all that, there are 12 notes in music. So that all made sense. Now, why Planet 12? Because of the fact that everybody around me always would be like, Law's on his own planet, man. This guy's just musically all over the place. He's out of this world. He's on some other shit. And there you go, Planet 12. It made so much sense. And I began to get into this concept even more because I started noticing that people who I was doing music with, they weren't really trying to go there, or they were scared to go there. But I knew that I wanted to go to an even deeper plateau by combining the worlds of funk rock and hip hop and R&B and jazz and even country, because I was really listening to country music at that time too, with Willie Nelson. The Oak Ridge Boys harmonies were very influential to me, and same thing with Alabama. So it was all starting to make sense to me, and basically the Planet 12 concept was born. Now all I needed was a movement to get behind me, because I know that though I wanted to do it alone, I know I needed a team to kind of see if this whole thing can work out. And you have to wait for the next block for that story.